Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I passed out several amendments yesterday and today. The first amendment I'd like to address is the electronic monitoring program. Line 9 on page 42. I understand that we wanted to do this in miscellaneous provisions, but I beg my colleagues to consider to put it in line 9, page 42, which reads, notwithstanding any provision of law or rule or regulation, the sum of $500,000 of the General Fund Tax Amnesty Program proceeds received in fiscal year 2018 shall be used by the Unified Judiciary to implement an electronic monitoring program for Guam's pretrial and criminal offender populations in fiscal year 2019. Now, Mr. Speaker, throughout the course of the year, we've had the judiciary come down here, and for some reason, they always seem to put this in the back burner because due to a lack of funds or because they don't want to prioritize this initiative. However, Mr. Speaker, I believe in this initiative. I believe that that this electronic monitoring program will allow people to be under house arrest instead of incarcerating them for an X amount of days, exposing them to perhaps other dangers that's with minor offenses, so if they committed minor offenses, and also it is a cost-saving measure for DOC, which is anticipating to save $2 million or more after the full implementation of this program. So I'd like to ask my colleagues' support in this amendment.
Okay. If it's okay, we'll just leave it in miscellaneous because rather than go back, just get this in and it'll be an appropriation. Okay?
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Speaker.
So this electronic monitoring program appropriation, any senator wish to be heard? Any senator wish to be heard? Is there any objection? Any senator wish to be heard? Is there any objection from any senator?
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, the next amendment that I have is to address the Department of Corrections. They received a little less this year, even with the fiscal realignment plan, so I'd like to, the amendment that I passed out reads, notwithstanding any other provision of law, rule, or regulation, the sum of $500,000 of the General Fund Tax Amnesty Program proceeds received in fiscal year 2018 shall be used for the Department of Corrections in fiscal year 2019. Specifically for, Mr. Speaker, to address some of the challenges they've been having in the prison. We've held several oversight hearings regarding the safety of the prisoners and their guards, and the biggest challenge that they have is the lack of personnel. They are severely outnumbered, and we even heard in one of the statements that sometimes the guards are, well, I don't want to repeat it, but really they need the support, and we need to start giving them a little bit more support to hire more personnel so that they can show a unified body without being threatened by inmates and also without being in fear that they don't have the support that they need inside and outside the gates.
On this amendment, colleagues, Senator Nelson has an amendment before us for $500,000 from the tax amnesty to go to the Department of Corrections. Any senator wish to be heard? Any senator wish to be heard? Is there an objection? Is there an objection? Is there an objection?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My final amendment is to help Guam Police Department source civilian volunteer police reserves. And throughout the course of this term, we've had several police reservists come and inquire or ask us for assistance for funding. And so in an effort to meet their needs, we proffer this amendment, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the sum of $100,000 of the General Fund Tax Amnesty Program proceeds received in fiscal year 2018 shall be used by the Guam Police Department for the sole purpose of paying allowances to members of the Civilian Volunteer Police Reserve as authorized by 10 GCA subsection 66104.1.
Senator Snogestein, do you wish to speak on this amendment?
Yes, I do, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this amendment, but I'd like to ask is that if additional funds can be provided through the tax amnesty to provide them the additional vehicles for the civilian police, the police reserve force, because on many occasions there's not enough vehicles in the police department, and even 2 additional vehicles would assist them in the mission that they were being asked to perform. So if there's any funds available, even adding an additional 100,000 to provide them the equipment they need, because on many occasions some of the police reserves actually have to take it out of their own pocket to buy their equipment that they're required to have on them when they're on duty. So just curious if that could be amended to increase equipment.
Can you do a separate amendment? Let's take this one first.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Please, thank you. On this Nelson amendment, any senator wish to be heard? Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when I look at the proposed amendment and the intent behind the proposed amendment, I was under the impression that, in fact, there's sufficient funding in this fiscal year's budget to be able to address something like this. I mean, there are a couple of police reserve officers that I see on a regular basis who literally put in a good number of hours, and I can say that possibly exceed the minimum requirement per month to be able to receive the allocation. And I think it's very unfortunate that these individuals are not receiving their compensation within a reasonable time. They should be considered partners of and officers within the Guam Police Department, and they should be compensated accordingly. But you know, if it's going to take a separate appropriation to address the timely payments of these police reserve officers, then by all means, Mr. Speaker, because they continue to provide a vital service in our community, ensuring the public safety of our people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other senator? Any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard? Is there any objection to the amendment?
No objection.
Is there any objection to the amendment? You still have the floor, Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, colleagues, for your support.
Thank you. On this, do I understand you have an amendment? Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just going back to the amendment that I was attempting earlier with regard to prior year hazardous pay for DYA. We were discussing it in the DYA section of the budget, but you were mentioning that it might be more appropriate in this section. And so this is an amendment that was distributed earlier, and it reads authorization to pay prior year hazardous pay up to $39,000 of the sum appropriated to DYA in fiscal year 2018 Appropriations Act for the payment of hazardous pay accrued in fiscal year 2016. So it's my understanding that they already have the funds set aside to pay, to make good on this payment, but they just need the legal authorization to be able to do that. And so that's what this language in this amendment does.
Thank you, and we'll have legal place it accordingly. All right? On this amendment by Senator Lee, she's advised us that DYA has the cash, it just needs the authorization now. Any senator wish to be heard on the Lee amendment for DYA? Any senator wish to be heard on the amendment to DYA? Any objection? Any objection?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, colleagues. There's also been an amendment circulated with regard to limited-term labor law enforcement specialists that I'd like to add to this chapter, section 11. So we've heard from the Department of Labor during their budget hearing that some of the issues that they've been having, they've been having issues with regards to labor law enforcement. And so this language would just give them the flexibility to be able to hire limited-term employees to assist them, not just with labor enforcement, but also employment development workers and some of the people that help them carry out their job at DOL. And I thank my colleagues in advance for their support.
Okay, your amendment is to go on page 125, 124 at the end? Okay. Senator Uggan, and Senator Nicholas and Senator Uggan.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Chairman. Could you provide clarity? I thought that we're not hiring any limited term employees in this budget. Mr. Chairman?
We could not put a provision in that prohibits it completely because unfortunately there are a number of necessary employees. I think it's the bus drivers.
My question, Mr. Chairman, is are we authorizing new limited term hires in this budget?
It's I think she's including it in the unclassified. Turn on the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's also to address some of the issues that we've had with the H-2B enforcement. And so we all know that that's cyclical. And so sometimes, they need additional help in some times of the year. And so that's what this language is addressing.
She can amend it, but there's still a hiring freeze, and we're going to have to figure out how to be able to get around that one. But it's going to be allowed, but first you have to get around the freeze.
My only concern, Mr. Chairman, is that as I look through this listing, on the section 11 that we have originally, I don't see it specifically say that we're authorizing specifically limited term employment. And I'm just concerned about us opening that door for adding into the budget language limited term employment authorizations. And further on in the language, Mr. Chairman, it reads also customer service representatives. That's like someone who's gonna, greet you at the door, or like, when you come in. And this entire section is focused more on critical hires in key service areas. I'm just not comfortable in a budget that's, incorporating a bunch of cuts and collections and tax increases, authorizing limited term hiring, and authorizing limited term hiring of customer service representatives. If we need labor law enforcement specialists, I can probably see that. That would probably fall in line with the H-2B enforcement. But employment development workers and customer service representatives, those seem very broad and more, they seem like hiring that's not critical. And this entire section focuses on areas that have a critical component. So if there's going to, I guess I would like to consider amending this to strike the words limited term and to strike the employment development workers and the customer service representatives. I can get behind labor law enforcement specialists because of that H-2B issue, but these other employment object categories, they just don't sound like they meet, for me at least, the critical employment threshold that this section is kind of focused around. So that would be my amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Nicholas has proffered an amendment to the Lee amendment. Senator Lee. Do you have any objection to the amendment, to your amendment? There's no objection. His amendment is to strike everything in that except for law enforcement specialists. Labor
This
law
was
enforcement.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is just a request from the Department of Labor. So, I mean, if Senator Nicholas wants, if the mover wants to strike everything except for labor law enforcement specialists, he's at liberty to do so.
Okay, so the Nicholas amendment is to strike everything but labor law enforcement specialist. Any senator wish to be heard? Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Actually, that was a similar concern that I was going to bring up, and I commend the mover of the amendment to delete those two particular positions. Secondly, I need to make sure that at least the directors, Mr. Speaker, have an opportunity to read this budget when we're done and to refer to Public Law 34-87, because this budget provides for transfer of employees. So go to the governor's office and plead with the governor if you need expertise or you need additional personnel, especially employment development workers and customer service representatives. I mean, come on, Mr. Speaker. We can't allow for any agency to continue to hire unnecessarily. Let's use the tools that are available in this government so that we contain costs. We streamline and ensure that allocations such as what we had to do with GMH and with DOE, that those sources of funds can be identified realistically without increasing taxes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard on the St. Nicholas Amendment amending the Lee Amendment? Any senator? None? Any objection to the amendment? Any objection? Thank you. Senator Lee, you still have the floor. Thank you very much.
That's all for this section. Thank you.
Any other senator? Have we completed all your amendments, Senator Uggan?
No, as a matter of fact, the legal counsel was finalizing the verbiage of the amendment with regards to stipends for boards and commissions. And then I do have an amendment, but I believe it's appropriate for the subsequent chapter that we'll be covering.
Okay, great. No, I thought there was with you and Senator Rodriguez, if all of the amendments you guys wanted to make has been addressed.
I just wanted the figure adjusted, Mr. Speaker. So
Okay.
yes, that was addressed already.
Thank you. Senator Senator Ada?
This is on section 20.
Wherever, yes, wherever you want in
Yes.
this chapter.
So-
Just a point of order, Mr. Chair. Are we still on the Lee amendment?
No, it passed.
No, I had my hand raised for comment when you asked if there was any other senator. After the amendment, after the St. Nicholas amendment passed, you asked if there was anyone else, and I had my hand up.
It passed. I thought but
We can go back to the tape, Mr. Chairman.
go ahead.
Thank you.
Well,
And because, and the reason I bring that up is because I was going to object to the amendment in its entirety. And I'd like the opportunity to, and again, we can have the clerks go back to the tape that I did have my hand raised to speak on the motion in its entirety. Thank you.
Continue. Let's move.
My objection on the matter, Mr. Chairman, is we went into 323 on what supposed was a zero-based budgeting, funding every government employee for their personnel. And then subsequently, we went straight to raising taxes. And so to stay consistent with the position I've taken before, adding any more personnel to government of Guam payroll, I think is ludicrous, considering we just raised taxes on people. And I think this just speaks to the same status quo operation that we do to keep funding this government. So if we're not going to make any adjustments or cuts to payroll or quote unquote trim the fat, how could we in good conscience raise taxes and add to the payroll liability of this government? And so I just believe I don't, and this is why I had issue with the entire approach to this budget from the beginning, and doing it from a personnel standpoint and from a tax increase standpoint. And so that's why I object to this amendment for consistency, as I did with the amendment prior to potentially hire more classified individuals as opposed to outsourcing under Guam Behavioral Health.
Thank you, and I've been advised that procedurally I'm going to have to ask you to move to reconsider, and we already understand what you're going to do.
Mr. Chair, I'd have to object to that. I believe we can go back to the tape, and I think it would reflect that when you were asking, I was waiting procedurally to be acknowledged. And so if you went ahead and gabbled that it passed without acknowledging me, I take difference to that.
All right. Just so we can, there's been an objection to the Lee amendment. All those in favor of the Lee amendment as amended by Senator St. Nicholas, please indicate by raising your hand. Okay. It passes. Senator Ada, I believe we're on your...
Yes, so Mr. Speaker, before lunch, Mr. Chairman, before lunch, we had passed the amendment to section 20 on page 129, paragraph A. So that amendment has passed. I have passed out the remainder of the amendments that I would like to make to paragraph B. Actually having a new paragraph B and then making appropriate amendments to paragraphs C and new D.
Does everybody have the amendment by Senator Ada, B, C, and D? Everyone? Okay.
Okay, so in this amendment, it proposes a new paragraph B, which really gives a little bit more specificity as to what we might be able to expect to see as a result of this A&E services that we're going to pay for. And so the language I'm providing is that at a minimum, the desired procurement deliverable is a schematic design package, which clearly indicates the improvements and construction anticipated for the Simon Sanchez High School construction project, or provides sufficient information on alternatives so that a clear direction for subsequent phases can be determined. Now, in construction design, or at least the design work that we're looking at doing, normally the increments that the design is provided is at the 30, 60, and 90% completion level. And the schematic design package is normally around the 30%. And what that normally shows you is, you know, it gives a pictorial illustration of the interiors of the building, from the outside, taking a look at what the building is going to look like, where it's going to be constructed, the surrounding areas and all that. So as a minimum, this is what we're going to be expecting, the schematic design package. Now, of course, when the request for proposal goes out, it should, I would hope that OAE would structure it so that the guy who, you know, maybe somebody would propose that they'll deliver a 60% level design. I don't know, but at a very minimum, what we're expecting is a schematic design package. So that's one amendment in section 20 to add the new paragraph B. The paragraph C is just renumbering the old B to now paragraph C. And then now what was paragraph C will now be paragraph D. And the amendment I'm making there is that I think we need to really give a little bit more time from the date of enactment for the superintendent to come back with his initial report on the status of the utilization of funds. So instead of within 60 days, I'm suggesting that within 180 days of enactment, the superintendent will report back, and the original language required that every 90 days he'll continue to provide reports on the status of the design work that's being undertaken.
I thank you for trying to save us some paper. Can we divide this question? Let's just take the first part on B, and then we'll take the number of days in D separately, if that is okay. I just don't want anybody to vote against because of some problem that they have with D, all right? So on B, anyone wish to speak on the amendment on B? Senator Agon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Based on the explanation that was provided, I'm trying to understand at a minimum what will be required, because it also has a provision or provides sufficient information on alternatives so that a clear direction for subsequent phases can be determined. And my issue is that the government of Guam, in this case, the Guam Department of Education, would be contracting out these services. So based on that contract, the deliverable has to be consistent with what is required in that contract. And I don't think it's the responsibility of a contracted entity by the government of Guam to provide alternatives so that a clear direction for subsequent phases can be determined. I just have a real concern with regards to that, because the government of Guam leadership, in this case the superintendent of education, has got to know and understand exactly what the minimal requirements are going to be, and then based on the contracted entity meeting those minimal requirements, then the superintendent, as the agent of the government of Guam, would say, okay, based on this, then our alternatives or our options would be 1, 2, and 3. Not where the contracted entity would be providing the alternatives. Now, if the contracted entity provides 1, 2, and 3 different options, it still comes down to the contracted deliverables by the government entity, in this case, DOE. So I have a concern with regards to that particular aspect of the amendment, Mr. Speaker, provides sufficient information and alternatives so that a clear direction for subsequent phases can be determined. Because based on the explanation that was shared offline, in terms of, okay, this is phase, this can be broken up into different phases. This will be phase 1, this will be phase 2, this will be phase 3, but those should all be part of the contract provisions so that the superintendent, as the government agent, would be able to make sufficient decisions in terms of how to move forward and how to collaborate with this body in finalizing the financial scheme to pay for the construction of the school. So I had to share those concerns with regards to the final last few words of that particular amendment, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Any other senator wish to be heard on the ADA amendment? Any other senator wish to be heard on the ADA amendment? Vice Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I understand they want to give DOE more time, but this...
Let's just do B, and then we'll do D separately, all right? Because I know you...
Well, I have no objection to B. Thank you.
On B, any other senator wish to be heard on B? Is there an objection to the language proffered in B? There's an objection? Okay, you may close, Senator Ada.
I'm fine. Just call for the question.
Okay. All those in favor of the ADA amendment as proffered in B, please indicate by raising your hand. Passes. Senator Ada on D.
On D, Mr. Chairman, and so I guess I'm just giving a little bit more time, 180 days, for that initial report to come back. But the original language was that to report within 60 days of enactment, or 60 days at the end of the fiscal year 2018. I'm just, again, I'm just thinking 180 days really would probably be a more realistic. I mean, just to get the initial procurement out for the OAE, and then for the OAE to put together the solicitation package for the architectural and engineering services. I think 180 days is a little bit more realistic.
The money's gone. Senator Uggan?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I certainly support the amendment, recognizing that we need to allow for the timeline to be protracted a bit more, because when the initial legislation was introduced, and presuming it had been entertained in a timely manner by this body, then, Mr. Speaker, we would be looking at the months of August, September, then 60 days after the conclusion of fiscal year 2018. It would have been 120 days, if not equivalent to that. So that's where allowing for the process, the superintendent of education, and then there are other considerations here, Mr. Speaker, when should the existing contest with the contract, the protest, be settled, then that would kick in, would serve as a kicker to allow this process to immediately commence. So I support the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This subsection D is just a requirement for a report. So I would think that the quicker we get a report, the better. There's no harm in asking for a report early on. In fact, I'm hoping we're going to hear something from the superintendent within 30 days as to really what amount we're looking for, or what amount he is willing to spend for architectural alone versus, and hopefully we can use the rest of that money for something else. But it's just for the report. So I think that to require the report early is better than to wait 5 more months, because people, all the students at Simon Sanchez are already asking us, what's taking so long with Simon Sanchez? And I think they need to understand, and this is the way for them to understand. If the superintendent is going to give reports, I would even amend that to be every 30 days. Every 30 days is hardly anything to ask for the amount of money that we're giving him, and for the amount of student outcry and public outcry regarding this school. So it's just 30 days submit a report as to the status of the utilization of funds. And so if he's not able to use it for any reason, hopefully we'll know about it sooner than later. And I think that's exactly what we need in this case, Mr. Speaker, is more reporting. So I would amend that to be 30, and provide a status report every 30 days thereafter. On the last line, instead of 90, that should also be 30. This 30 days report on this money from here on until Simon Sanchez is built.
The Vice Speaker's amendment is to change the number in the first line of D to 30 days, and to change the number on the last line of D to 30 days. Is that correct? Okay, on the Vice Speaker's amendment, Senator Ada. Okay, any senator wish to be heard on the Terlahi amendment to the Ada amendment? 30 days, 30 days. Senator Agan.
Mr. Speaker, the mover of the amendment to the amendment absolutely has a very legitimate concern, and that is making sure that the community at Simon Sanchez High School are made aware of almost every step and every progress that is realized, but a constricted time frame of 30 days just to prepare the RFP, and then to release the RFP, and then to receive a response and to select a contracted service provider, AOE, and then an A&E representative. Those are processes that sometimes could take literally 60 to 120 days. So if the report that would be requested is, okay, status quo, this is the report, the RFP is being finalized, and then has been released, we're awaiting a response. I mean, if we want that, then certainly 30 days would be sufficient, but I think we need to provide the superintendent ample time to be able to complete the process. And if you look at the initial requirement of 90 days, I mean, that would have been subsequent after the first reporting. That would have been sufficient to be able to provide responses to this body, and also to representatives in the Simon Sanchez community. So I just wanted to share that, Mr. Speaker, but I don't object to the amendment, but it's just being a little bit more realistic about understanding this contractual process.
We understand that. It's just trying to make sure that the Simon Sanchez community understands that if there isn't anything happening in 30 days, that it is not this legislature's fault, that it is the superintendent who hasn't acted. And every 30 days thereafter, every time, don't come to us. Go from your civics class.
That's why I did not object, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. All right. Any other senator wish to be heard? Any objection to the Terlahi amendment for 3030? Is there another amendment in this chapter by any other?
Mr. Speaker, I got two.
Just a second. I've been told that though I thought I separated them, on the entire ADA amendment, on D. Okay, on the D amendment as amended, Is there any objection or anyone wish to be heard? Any objection? Okay, yours is going to take some time. I'm just trying to get the small ones out. Pardon? I'm trying to close this chapter, and I'm trying to, I told everybody to please get amendments. Do you have any, St. Augustine?
Yes, I have two, Mr. Speaker.
All right.
I have amendment is to add a section on chapter 12, and it's my colleagues should have a copy. It's pursuant to the authority under Title 17 Guam Code. It's in reference to the Department of Education shall pursue its option to enter into a power purchase agreement. It's in reference to renewable energy. And that whatever cost savings realized by the use of solar energy shall be available for use by DOE for its operation. Does everybody have a copy of that? This was given out earlier.
Yes, I have a copy. Does everybody have a copy? It's been circulated. Does anybody wish to speak on this amendment being offered by Senator St. Augustine? Any senator wish to be heard on this amendment?
It's the same thing. Just to make them have fun, find money and no cost to us.
The solar energy. Second, people are having problems finding. Tom, the Vice Speaker just...
I have a...
Okay, on the St. Augustine amendment, Senator Nicholas, did your hand go up?
Yes, it did, Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized.
In reviewing this amendment, it reads, pursuant to its authority, the Guam Department of Education shall pursue its option to enter into one or more power purchase agreements to purchase solar energy from qualified providers that will be in the best financial interest of the government of Guam within 90 days of enactment of this act. The word shall, Mr. Chairman, in this amendment reads to me that it will compel the Department of Education to enter into a power purchase agreement. And that's concerning because I don't have any information in front of me to make me comfortable in mandating that they enter into a power purchase agreement. The other danger of this, Mr. Chairman, is by mandating they enter into one and by setting a 90-day time frame that they do, they can be put with the most horrendous of terms and they will be mandated to accept. And if they don't accept, we could be actually opening ourselves up to some kind of egregious lawsuit by a power purchase provider saying, the law says you're supposed to sign with me, you didn't sign with me, and now I'm suing you because I should have gotten this contract. So I'm concerned about the construct of the amendment, Mr. Chairman. I yield at this time to you if you have anything to add.
In looking at it, and I'll have to confess that I've not attended every single public hearing, so I'm not sure if the chairman has conducted a public hearing on this provision so the DOE would be able to come in and explain to us why they've not done this. I know that it's been in statute for a while to get into solar energy, but
Mr. Speaker, on each round table, I've asked and inquired, and the superintendent responded with number one, they're waiting for GPA, they're waiting for GSA, and this act has been since 2013. And in our budget act, it talks about if they reduce the incentive of reducing cost. This can save them money. It's saving folks today. And of all people, as several of our colleagues have brought up, we're spending money. This is where we can save some money. And it goes right back to DOE. And I've asked them that, and all they've been saying is they're waiting for GSA. All the reasons for the lack of action. And I'm only putting it, and if we want, if any of my colleagues want, we can change it to may pursue. But as we keep coming up with reasons how to save money, and at least put back money into the schools, well, there's not a lot of money out here to fix our schools. And this may be a source of funding every year as they save money. There's $12 million being paid into the power bill. And if they can save $4 or $5 million and help fix the schools, then that'll be a source of funding.
Okay, so Senator Nicholas, if the language is changed to may, would you be willing to?
We could work with that, and I'll just keep.
All right, so
calling on oversight.
this amendment is now going to be amended to read may pursue. Is there any objection to that amendment, Vice Speaker?
I'm sorry, it's not on the May. It's on the...
Okay, on the may, on amending it to read may pursue. No objection? All right, on the entire amendment, Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the sponsor of this amendment for bringing this, on the floor. I think it deserves attention here today because the original legislation that authorized DOE to pursue solar energy made those savings available to DOE, like the last line of this amendment here. So my issue is that, yes, I don't think we're going to achieve what we want to achieve by this amendment, as opposed to call them in again for an oversight hearing on this law, bring in GSA at the same time. If whatever excuses that you've heard in the past, bring all the parties in and let's resolve it once and for all. It obviously was not an issue with the existing law that they had. And I think, so I'm glad that the change was made, because forcing them to enter an agreement when they're obviously not prepared to do that at this point, I agree with urging them to do this, though. So I just think we shouldn't include this here in this budget, because the cost savings are already dictated by statute how they're going to be spent. So that last line, I think, might interfere with however it's been laid out already. And I think this looks like it's just a matter of getting these people in here. They have the incentive, I would think, for the savings already in their in enactment of that prior statute. So it's a matter of if we could get them in on another way, an oversight hearing or something else, and call all those parties together, and let's just see what their issue really is. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Estevez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious, and maybe the author can answer. As I'm reading this line, purchase solar energy from qualified providers that will be in the best financial interests of the government of Guam. And I guess what I'm wondering is how is that determined? And secondly, is that an improper position to put the Guam Department of Education in to determine what is in the best financial interests of the government of Guam in its entirety, or specific to the Department of Education? And I think if there's no criteria, then I think that's too general of a statement to make if we're talking about them having to enter into some kind of agreement. If it's the intent of the author that they're looking at the cheapest or most economical, then I think that would be better verbiage, but maybe the author can specify the intent.
Thank you, Senator. Any other on Any other senator wish?
Does the author yield to the
Do
question?
you yield?
Mr. Speaker, yes. My colleagues, it's in Public Law 32-095. In March of 2013 is when they asked the schools. It's been 5 years now. And if we're looking at reducing the cost of government, we've got to do something. The Guam Legislature is built on renewable energy. Why can't everybody else reduce the cost of government? That's my issue here. This is what I pursued for almost 2 years now with DOE. I did this when I was on the board, finding a source to reduce the cost of DOE. And that's why I'm pursuing this, because it's quite evident they can't seem to get GPA to help them get their power pool agreement done. They can't get GSA to get their contracts going. I'm just asking that we put it in the budget, that they got to find a way to reduce the cost. DOE is $229 million. If they can save $4 or $5 million, that's $5 million more for the DOE to help fix the schools. That's my intent, and that's the intent of the original law. Reduce the cost of government.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. Let me be specific to the question, if the author would so yield, to elaborate on what the intent is specific to an agreement that will be in the best financial interests of the government of Guam. And I'm just wondering if we can elaborate on what that means. What are we considering in the best financial interests of the government of Guam? And is that the way we want to go? Best financial interests of the government or best financial interests of Department of Education, which, might just be semantics, but I'm just wondering what the criteria is. How is the best financial interest going to be determined?
Do you yield?
I'm trying to understand what you're trying to get at, but I don't know. Savings is savings. If the DOE can save and DOE can invest in themselves, then so be it. But if you're not in support of this, your direction. You vote in whatever direction you want. I'm after DOE savings. Thank you.
What I'm asking, Mr. Chairman, is best financial interest could mean many things. And when we're talking specifically to an agreement, that might be a stipulation in how the agreement is generated. So what we've seen is the agreement can be for a better product, or is it based on the cheapest? So are we doing an agreement with a solar power provider based on the cheapest option? I think if that's the case, then I think we should just be very explicit in the language. But if we use general terminology such as the best financial interests of the government, I think that's a stark difference from trying to find savings, because we're specifically talking about an agreement, and how that agreement is formulated. The language matters. And so it's not that I'm opposed to the idea. I'm actually very much in support of the idea. I would just like to know what we're setting DOE up for. And are we all on the same page of what does the best financial interests of the government of Guam mean? Because, we're talking about the Guam Legislature. I don't necessarily believe that. If we can confirm, was the solar provider the cheapest option out there, or did we have other criteria that we utilized? And I think that's very important. Is there potential for a solar provider might be the cheapest option, but they might not qualify to at least to the specifications for a LEED certification. And so those are the types of details that I think we need to understand moving forward before we push an agreement. And so if we're looking at the most economical, i.e. the cheapest, then we just need to say the agreement will be to the cheapest.
Vice Speaker, you had a question?
Just point of information.
Please.
It's a very good point, because it is subject to interpretation, but that's why I would recommend, we just strike this entire first sentence and leave the next sentence that says they shall submit a report on their progress, and then we can act. Because the first sentence interferes with the existing law, and actually it's consistent. The existing law says something about the best financial interest of the government, they're going to purchase power, and then it gives out all the terms and what they're going to do with any savings or, and all the details. So instead of trying to reiterate the details of that law, I think we should not mess with it, and we should just take out that first sentence and then require them to submit a progress report. And the law was very detailed about what we're going to do with the savings, so I would take out that last sentence also. And so we continue with 7116, the existing statute, but just kind of hold their feet to the fire more. Thank you.
Yeah, if maybe the way to resolve this is that you leave 7116 as it is and add the last 4 lines of this amendment at the very end of 7116 as a reporting requirement, that within 30 days of the enactment of this act, they shall come back to us and explain to us what we're doing. It addresses the Vice Speaker's concern about wanting to have an oversight hearing with everybody. It doesn't get into all the other. 7116 has like 15 different subsections. I mean, it goes from A to, I think, T. I mean, so if we just have a reporting requirement that within 30 days they come back to us and explain to us how they can make that savings, and so that we know what we can do with them moving forward. Or if they need help with GSA or GPA, bring them in to help DOE do it. Can we just make this just a reporting requirement at the very end of 7116?
If that's what the body chooses, Mr. Speaker, it's since 2013, it's 5 years. The Department of Education has been spending over $10 million a year, and not one movement has happened to save and reduce the costs. But if the body wants to keep on waiting, then so be it. We'll wait until next year.
Mr. Chairman, did we already pass the amendment to change the shall to may?
Yes. And so, but shall we just call the question on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make that amendment to strike the terminology, I think as discussed, say for the last 4 lines, the reporting requirement. That way the law stands as it is, and no other language, even though it may be consistent, could be otherwise interpreted or misconstrued to work in contention with that law. So if the statute already states pursuant to section 7116, I think that's good to stand alone, and then I would move to strike everything else other than the reporting requirement.
All right, the amendment is to just make this a reporting requirement to be stuck at the end of 7116, to have a report on their status. Is there any senator wish to be heard on the Esteves amendment? Any objection to the Esteves amendment? Now that the Esteves amendment has been adopted on this whole section now, without the first part, I guess I would have thought that would have been, but any objection to the adoption of the reporting requirement as amended? Anyone? Any other amendments in this chapter? Okay. Senator Snargasini, you have the floor.
I have one more amendment. It's reference to the temporary employment of retired attorneys. It's for the Attorney General's office. It's similar to all the other temporary employment of folks on the police department, corrections. Due to there's not a long list of attorneys that are available to work at the Attorney General's office. They've asked that if this can be included, Attorney General may hire retired government attorneys when a critical need arises. They're pretty much all the same as the other sections of the temporary employment.
I think we should point at Senator Estevez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I have issue with this language, and I oppose this amendment. I think it's very subjective with what I think the determination of a critical need should arise. With regard to public safety, police officers, firefighters, and correction officers, it's been highlighted before that the critical need is specific to the reference of a large-scale military deployment, considering that a large makeup of those sectors are National Guard members, service members, and reservists. However, I don't see that need being as critical in terms of attorneys. And again, goes back to my point. We've raised taxes, we haven't cut any personnel, and we consider continuously in this budget allow for the addition of more personnel onto the payroll, which is a fixed liability and fixed cost, fixed expense that's going to affect the cash management on the budget, a budget that's already strapped for cash. And so, with that, I don't believe there's a critical need here, Mr. Chairman. I don't believe that you're going to find many attorneys that will come up on deployment orders that's going to leave a huge vacancy. So I object to this amendment.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard? I think I'd like to call to the attention of the senators. This is not the same as all the others. We've stuck in here a maximum salary of attorney 4. Yes, there's a level 1, but I just point that out that.
Mr. Chairman, in layman terms, very costly. Is that correct?
I'm just pointing out that on line 2, the provision is that they could be hired at a maximum salary of level 4, attorney 4. It might be step 1, but it's attorney 4. And that's not the same as the.
So, Mr. Speaker, do you have a recommended amendment to that would make it level 2 or 1? I mean, whatever. If there's an amendment, then we can
If the attorney is
put it
already
in.
getting his retirement, and to come back in at attorney 4, it should be just at the lowest level like everybody else.
Would be, so then you're recommending then attorney level 1?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
I have no problem. If we want to bring it down to level 1, I mean.
The problem that we have is that this is a new section, and though it is true that we are dealing with maybe a critical need, I'm not sure whether or not it is or isn't. There was no hearing on this, so we don't know why that was. When we did the CPS worker, we took it back down. They were coming in at 2. We brought them back down to 1. And so I'm just saying, without knowing what these are, I'm not sure what the salary ought to be or could be. There has been no hearing, and so I'll take my guidance from the oversight chair if she understands what may be needed.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Nicholas.
I'd like to officially make the motion to amend it from level 4 to level 1.
All right, the amendment being proffered by Senator Nicholas is on line 2 to have it Attorney 1, Step 1.
Just get it in the door. If over next year it looks like it needs to be ramped up, then you guys
Any senator wish to be heard on the Nicholas amendment to the Augustine amendment?
Mr. Chair, point of inquiry. Isn't there a statute that already regulates the entry, the level of an employee upon entry if they're retired?
I'm not sure. I'll have to check with legal.
Just a point of information, Mr. Chair.
Committee of the Whole is back in order. When we left off, we were at the St. Nicholas Amendment. Any other senator wish to be heard on the St. Nicholas Amendment? Any senator wish to be heard on the St. Nicholas Amendment? Any senator wish to be heard? Okay, will you restate your amendment, Senator St. Nicholas?
Just to amend the attorney level for the rehiring from level 4 down to level 1, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. On that amendment to reduce it to level 1, any objection? Objection? Okay, there's an objection. All those in favor of it being at level 1, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion passes. On the main amendment by Senator Nicholas, any other senator wish to be heard on this retired attorney section? Madam Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to further amend that amendment to restrict this employment of retired attorneys to the areas of tax collection and criminal prosecution. I think those are the areas that could really benefit from retired as opposed to entry-level attorneys. Of course, it's obvious the more experienced a prosecutor you are, probably the better we're going to have outcome on our prosecution division. Same thing with tax collection, Mr. Speaker. So that's my amendment.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Speaker. Madam Vice Speaker, inasmuch as Senator St. Nicholas has successfully reduced it to 1, that'll be 1 in your, okay? Okay, so Vice Speaker is just adding the underlined section to this section. All those who wish to speak on the Vice Speaker's amendment, limiting the areas to tax collection and criminal prosecution. Any senator wish to be heard? Any senator wish to be heard? Any objection? Any objection? Any other amendment or anyone else who wish to be heard on the St. Nicholas Amendment? We'll start with your hand, then your hand, then your. St. Augustine Amendment. No, you don't want. Senator Esteves?
Mr. Chairman, they're still processing my amendment, making copies. I'll defer to one of my colleagues for now.
Okay, it's going to be in the section. All right, fine. Senator Agon, you wish to be heard? Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I believe my colleagues received my amendment. There's, actually looking at it, there's, I believe a typo on there. If you look at the lines that I add, it should be a standalone section, a standalone sentence, and it should be after the word employee on the line above. So any attorney hired under this section shall only be eligible to enroll into Government of Guam health insurance. And the way it should read after that sentence, such employment shall not close vacancies to qualified applicants. I think, correct. It should be a standalone sentence, correct.
I'm sorry. Your amendment is just the underlined section?
Yes, it's supposed to be its own sentence, and it's supposed to be inserted between the word employee, period, the Attorney General on the next sentence.
So your
We can redo the amendment, so
You're going to have to, and let me do this because they keep telling me I can't do a third amendment to an amendment. So I'm going to call the question on the amendment as with the two amendments intact, and then get back to you when you can make an amendment after that.
you're correct, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the reminder.
Thank you. Let's call the question on the San Augustine amendment as amended by both the Vice Speaker and Senator San Nicolas. On that amendment, anybody have an objection?
Objection, Mr. Speaker.
All right, there's an objection. All those in favor of the amendment, San Augustine amended by the other two, please indicate by raising your hand. Amendment passes. Senator Estevez, I understand you would like to now amend this section.
Correct, and if my colleagues would prefer, we can reprint the amendment with the correction, but the new sentence should sit on the sixth line of the sheet we have before, between the closing of between employee and the Attorney General. So it should be its own sentence. And the sentence reads, such employment shall not close vacancies to qualified applicants. The concern I had, Mr. Chairman, and it hasn't been made clear as to whether or not if a vacancy in the classified sector is filled by a retiree for a critical need, does that preclude the agency or entity from finding someone qualified to fill that vacancy in the classified sector? And so if they're going to fill it in an unclassified capacity as an LTA, I believe that vacancy should still be open and available for application from the public at large. And so that's the purpose for this amendment, Mr. Chairman, to ensure that we're not filling classified positions with unclassified employees and with no motion or movement to try to meaningfully place people in a classified merit-based system.
Okay. On the Estevez amendment, Senator San Nicolas, Senator Torres, did? No. Okay, Senator San Nicolas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Usually when we hire under these kind of terms, it's under a contract. Like, for example, in DOE, if we're filling teacher shortages with contracts, the contracts are valid for a period certain. It's usually to the expiration of the fiscal year. And then at such time, if there's someone that can fill that vacancy, they fill it. Usually what the agencies do is they establish a list, and so they contract out the position, they fill it temporarily, they establish a list of eligible applicants who can fill it when it opens up again, and they fill it at that time. But I don't think we can hire someone and still call the position vacant at the same time. And if we were to hire them under a contract, I don't think we can just terminate them in order to fill it with a new hire. So we just need to be careful that we're not saying that a position is vacant when it's been filled. And I know that there's a whole slew of rules and regulations with respect to employment practices when it comes to using temporary hires to fill vacancies, but not making them temporarily permanent. The whole point of a limited term appointment is that they do have an expiration date. And upon expiration, that's when the qualified applicants who apply for the positions can typically fill those slots. So I'm not quite sure how this amendment fits into all of that, and if it creates a duality with the positions in that they are filled but still vacant.
Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Torres.
I'm just objecting, Mr. Chairman, because this makes absolutely no sense. The insertion of that statement is in a place where it's talking about reporting requirements, and so I just don't see how it's relevant. If the intent was to not close vacancies to qualified applicants, maybe that's should be in a sentence separate and apart from a reporting requirement where it's inserted. I guess I'm confused. It just makes no sense. So I object.
Mr. Chairman, like I said, I can have them reprinted out. As I stated before to my colleagues, that it is its own sentence and it's in the wrong place right now. It's a typo. I think if we want to recess, we can have it reprinted.
Let's take a short recess. Somebody. Is this the way you want? Okay, everyone. You've all received the Estevez amendment and where it should go. Any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard? Inasmuch as there was an objection, Senator Estevez, you're invited to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand and I thank my colleagues for their comments, and I believe it's important to have this duality. The goal is to fill qualified applicants into the classified sector, considering that even if there was a contract for a limited term employee, that should at most only exist throughout for the appropriation of the fiscal year, then there would have to be a new contract involved in the hiring, and a convenience clause applied in that contract wouldn't be difficult to pursue. I think the goal should always be to try to fill those vacancies, and when we're talking about positions like attorneys or potentially specialized attorneys or other professionals, I think it's important that those types of qualified individuals are not just waiting around for the call to come work for the government. And so if we miss out on the opportunity to fill the position, we're going to constantly be going back trying to fill this with a retired individual. So it's important that the vacancy stays open. And so by adding the convenience clause, it should be with the understanding that, hey, look, you know, if we're hiring somebody, they're retired, maybe they have other business going on, but with the convenience clause to know that it truly is temporary, and it's temporary until we fill it with a qualified individual into the classified service. It could be argued, I believe, that closing the vacancy to fill it with a retired individual might violate the rights of a classified employee who may be qualified for that position, is otherwise restricted from it or restricted from applying for that position, and they have rights under the merit system within the classified system, and I don't believe those same rights and those rights don't transfer to an unclassified employee who's already retired. And so I think if the goal is to fill vacancies, it should be filled with those that are going to enter the merit system. And so I think this amendment secures that. So it doesn't take away from the ability for the Attorney General to hire retired government attorney to fill a need, but I think it ensures that we're still trying to fill that job with somebody maybe inside the agency itself that meets the qualifications, or somebody from outside the agency that can fill those qualifications. And so I ask my colleagues to consider this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. There's been an objection. All those in favor of the Estevez amendment, please indicate by raising your hand. Passes. Motion passes. Inasmuch as we've already adopted the amendment, and this was only an amendment to that, we've done that, this whole section, right? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I circulated this amendment before lunch. I appreciate the committee affording the members some time to continue pouring through it, as it does involve multiple pages. It is the entirety of Bill 286-34 that has already been publicly heard and has a committee report filed. Mr. Chairman, this amendment seeks to incorporate into this Budget Act the provisions that we outlined in Bill 286 that would establish a system for receiving whistleblowing cases on false claims against the government and on taxes that are unreported to the government. And I beg the indulgence of my colleagues. I know that this is a very extensive amendment, but the reason why I'm proffering it in this Budget Act is because it's very relevant to the fact that we have incorporated in this Budget Act the need to fund certain operations with collections money. This bill being proffered as an amendment to this act will greatly enhance the ability of this government to pursue uncollected taxes and greatly enhance the ability of this government to pursue fraudulent claims that have been made that could result in recoveries. Just as a preliminary, Mr. Chairman, the fiscal note on this bill that is now proffered as an amendment indicates that this would be revenue generating, and it doesn't involve necessarily the establishment of a new agency or department. What this amendment will do is it creates an incentive for individuals to come forward and report false claims or unreported taxes. This amendment is modeled after existing federal statute 26 USC section 7623, which is the whistleblower federal statute on the federal income tax, and 31 USC sections 3729 to 3733, which are the federal statutes on false claims. The federal government, Mr. Chairman, has these systems in place already on the federal side. We do not have them on the local side. So if somebody has a tax, if somebody knows of unreported taxes on the federal mirror system, the income taxes, the withholding taxes, the corporate income taxes, they can file it with Rev and Tax using Form 211, and Rev and Tax will be compelled to act on it because of the federal mirror system. Form 211 does not apply to local taxes. That's very important to understand. We have no mechanism for individuals to report unreported taxes, nor do we have a mechanism for those individuals to have those reportings incentivized. We have it on the federal side, we don't have it on the local side. So GRT, BPT, property tax, alcohol tax, tobacco tax, we have no mechanism by which our members of our community can initiate actions in order to compel collections. This is a key component, Mr. Chairman, that's missing in our local statutes. We have gone after in the past the federal tax side, and there have been cases, but we have had zero on the local tax side. These amendments will not only create that mechanism, but it would empower our people to initiate the action in lieu of the government. The people would file the claim. If the government doesn't act on the filing of the claim, the people can act on the filing of the claim. The government can at any time vacate the claim if they find it to be frivolous. The government can also at any time step into the claim and take over if they find it to be something worth their while, or if they have the resources to jump in. Or the government can allow for the individual or entity to pursue it on a civil side and then close it off on the government side and issue the awards that are stipulated in the amendment. On the false claim side, similar circumstances, we do not have a local false claim statute. And that's very significant, Mr. Chairman, because on the federal side, we even had cases here on Guam where individuals were awarded for reporting false claims on federal contracts. Because we have no mechanism on the local side, there's a lot of potential abuse going on that's going unreported, and there is no incentive mechanism to compel the reporting. So for example, Mr. Chairman, if we have a road that's built and it's built with substandard materials or materials that are not up to par with the invitation for bid or the RFP, and somebody knows about it, there's no incentive for them to come forward. And what that could result in is in us getting a substandard product and nobody revealing it. We know, Mr. Chairman, that Guam is small, and that already creates a lot of hurdles for our people to come forward. When we don't have the mechanism by which they can actually do that, it makes it even harder, because who are you going to tell? And even if we do have the mechanism, if there's no incentive, people sit back and say, you know, if I do this, I might not have a job. And this is a lot of risk, so they stay quiet. creating this mechanism, mirroring it after what we have on the federal side, will transform that. And I believe that it is very timely with this budget because we're talking about bringing in uncollected taxes anyway. Incorporating this into the Budget Act would further empower that and help us to go out and find above and beyond the $73 million that's already been mentioned by the Department of Revenue and Taxation. Mr. Chairman, in the public hearing for this bill, we've had a very healthy variety of testimony. We had a retired federal attorney testify in favor of this. We had a practicing private attorney testify in favor of this. And we even had testimony transmitted to us by a national organization that focuses on helping states to bring these kind of statutes into their code. The Taxpayers Against Fraud Education Fund submitted testimony to the legislature on July 24th, and their chairman, who is a Assistant Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for 21 years, and a managing attorney in the Medicaid Fraud Division, and was responsible for their Medicaid false claims practice, submitted a multi-page testimony on behalf of the national organization that has over 400 different attorney members, all in support of this bill that is now being proffered as an amendment to the Budget Act. We did not receive any adverse testimony, Mr. Chairman. The fiscal note indicates that this is revenue generating. We have private, public, and national organizations testifying in favor of this. And we have federal statutes that we are mirroring that have proven over the years to be highly effective in recovering monies for the government against those who violate false claim statutes and those who fail to properly report their taxes. Mr. Chairman, I proffer this as an amendment to the Budget Act, hoping that my colleagues can support this so that we can make sure that we are empowering our community to do what the government might not do, and that is go after these uncollected taxes so that we can fill these budgetary gaps and mitigate the tax increase and cuts that we're constantly being faced with. If we can do this in lieu of having to deal with those kind of issues, I think that this is something that our community can rally around. So I humbly ask my colleagues to support this amendment. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. On this Nicholas amendment, any senator wish to be heard? On this Nicholas amendment, any senator wish to be heard? Senator Argan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I certainly commend the sponsor of the amendment in terms of advocating for allowing our government and Guam employees to be protected should they come forward, and then also be rewarded for any cost savings or reductions or fraudulent activities that are reported. Mr. Speaker, there's a whistleblower provision within the Guam Code already, and there was legislation that was introduced that would allow for expanded application in terms of our public employees being able to report either to the media or not directly to the supervisor, because the existing whistleblower provision requires that they go up the chain, report to your supervisor, but what if the supervisor is really the one contributing to the questionable activities? And then it also requires that they go further up the chain with the department before any claims are filed or concerns are filed with the legal, whether the law enforcement community or with the Office of the Attorney General. So those are provisions that particular legislation, which I had introduced a little earlier, and for some odd reason it's finding its way around this entire legislative cycle where it has yet to even reach be entertained in a public hearing. But my question to the sponsor, Mr. Speaker, with regards to this, now would this provision amend the existing code in reference to the whistleblower, or is it a separate and apart provision from what is already mandated?
You yield.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We do not touch the local whistleblower statute. What this does is it creates a different kind of whistleblowing. That type of whistleblower statute is focused on GovGuam employees who are revealing situations within the government. This focuses more on anyone who's whistleblowing specific to false claims filed against the government and people who are not paying their taxes to the government. So it actually more so covers the private side, because that way, if you're working for a company, let's say you're a mid-level accountant on a high-level corporation here in Guam, and you, through the documentation coming across your desk, realize that the company you're working for is underreporting their taxes. As that employee, you can come forward and you can use this statute to report that to the government. You can come forward, and even if the government doesn't act, you can hire attorneys and act on behalf of the government, kitam, on behalf of the king, on behalf of the state. And by winning the case, you can win up to 25% of the amounts that you recover. So, Mr. Chairman, for example, we have a recent filing of $14.7 million. If somebody comes forward and says, hey, you know, that's just the last 3 years, but I'm going to be able to prove to you that we can go back for the last 20 or the last 10, they can receive 25% of that recovered money. And that's just one example. If anybody out there knows of any company or any individual that's not reporting its taxes, you can come forward and use this whistleblower statute to not only pursue the claim on behalf of the government, but also receive a portion of the recoveries, up to 25%. So if it's $1 million, you're able to help the government recover, you can get a $250,000 check. So this is more so on, it's more generalized. It's not just limited to government of Guam employees. And it does not change the local whistleblower statute, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, to the good sponsor of the amendment. So in this particular case, it would not be duplicative in nature. Based on the explanation that I just heard, the focus is on tax collections and obligations to the government of Guam from that perspective, rather than the whistleblower provisions already mandated for the entire government of Guam? Okay. So I received an affirmative nod in that regard, Mr. Speaker. So I certainly hope that the provision that has been introduced, that it eventually finds its way to a public hearing before the end of this term. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard on this Nicholas amendment? Any senator wish to be heard on this Nicholas amendment? Vice Speaker?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm trying to is this bill the same? I mean, is this floor amendment the same as one of the bills we had the public hearing on? Is it the same
Bill
as
286, yes.
286, okay. Because there was also another bill that we had regarding whistleblowing. So if I could just ask a couple questions. One is, so this is going to take out of the proceeds of some of our tax collections and give as an award to people who report. But the amounts look like, to me, at least 15%, but not more than 30%. And so I'm just wondering, are we talking about the SAR fund here, and that this is going to, diminish those estimates? Or is this completely new money in addition to the SAR fund that I think it's reasonable that this is going to come out of actually even the current estimates for collections. Well, I guess it's going to come. It's going to
yield.
The other thing, Mr. Speaker, if I may ask, so that he can just answer all of it at the same time, it's the pages aren't numbered, but there's a subsection. It's 37103, I think A5, and it talks about it shall apply with respect to any action against any taxpayer, but in the case of an individual, only if the gross income exceeds $200,000. And then B, if the tax penalties, interest, additions to tax, and additional amounts in dispute exceed $2 million. If you could just explain that one section, I think who's exempted? Yes.
Senator Nicholas, do you yield to both inquiries?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. On the first inquiry, this would not include any SAR money that has already been identified, and the collections on that is already in formal process. This would actually open the door for new money to be identified. Individuals can come forward and report what revenue tax doesn't already know about, and upon filing that claim and officially documenting it, then they would put themselves in line to receive the remuneration if there was a successful closing of the case. With respect to that exemption language, Madam Vice Speaker, we actually mirrored the federal exemption thresholds only because we're trying not to reinvent the wheel as much as possible. And so we're just mirroring everything that's on the federal side so that way revenue tax and also our tax courts and our tax attorneys, they're not having to reconfigure or redefine any of these things. They can just look at kind of how things have been handled on the federal side and handle it locally in the same vein.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just sorry, one more question, if you'd bear with me. Just my notes from the hearing say that Department of Revenue and Taxation did not attend and they did not weigh in on this. But do we have anything from them since then that says whether they can handle implementation?
Do you wish to yield?
We have not received anything from them, but just on the surface, they do this on the federal side. We're mirroring the federal statute, so just applying it to our local taxes, but having the same kind of system in place, it doesn't seem too cumbersome to me. But they have not weighed in to object to the bill.
Okay, I guess I do worry about them being able to do this. It says in one part that under regulations prescribed by the director, he's authorized to pay from the monies appropriated to the Department of Revenue and Taxation for these things. In another part, it says they can get it from the proceeds from their collections pursuant to these things. So I just, well, we'll see. I guess we're going to wait for rules and regs on this also. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Torres, is your hand up? Yeah, yes.
Mr. Speaker, it's moving rather quickly. I'm looking at the Compiler of Law's website right now just to understand where this amendment falls. And what it is it's creating a new Chapter 37 in Division 3 of Title 5 Guam Code Annotated. So it's I'm just trying to, what I'd like to find out is does this actually need to be a part of the Budget Act? Because it is a substantial section to Title 5, which is separate and apart from what we're doing in the Budget Act. And while it may generate funds, that prospective generation of funds doesn't really tie into what we're doing in terms of identifying revenues and appropriating revenues. So I'm just trying to get a handle on if in fact it's necessary to include this at this time in this particular Budget Act, because it is a substantial piece that can stand on its own as a separate budget, a separate bill measure. And you know, I respectfully acknowledge the good efforts of this potential revenue stream, and you know, making all things tie into our desire to have the supplemental appropriations revenue funds, you know, be further, or I guess in this case it wouldn't, but it may have a tie into funds going into that account. I'm not sure. But I would object to entertaining this at this point. I think that it is an appropriate standalone measure to a specific code in our statute. But I do commend him for a good piece of legislation or a proposed piece of legislation.
There's been an objection. Do you wish to address it?
Are you asking me to close, Mr. Chairman, or to address on the objection? Yeah, I didn't hear from the retiring speaker any purpose for objecting other than that it's going to go into the code. But this entire budget act is, it affects the code. It becomes Guam law once it becomes enacted. So we are enacting Guam law. One of the reasons why. One of the standing rules that you have, Mr. Chairman, with respect to this budget act is nothing goes into miscellaneous provisions unless it's at a hearing, is that we can all say that we're following the exact process of it being enumerated into Guam law. So, absent any substantive purpose to the objection, I'm asking my colleagues to support the amendment. Are you asking me to close, Mr. Chairman?
No, I just thought you would, if you wanted to address the objection as was stated. Senator Munya, do you wish to be heard?
I'll withdraw the objection. Perhaps I was just expressing a concern. It is substantive. I'm not so familiar with this subject matter, and but that's not to say I can't become very familiar very fast. Thank you.
Thank you very much for withdrawing your objection. Senator Munya, you're still recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too share the same sentiments as the retiring speaker. I'm inclined to support this, but I'm not sure that it belongs here. And although it is relevant and it may generate some revenue, I guess the author of this amendment is taking the risk that this budget bill may not even make it, and then this will fall with the bill, I guess, if that makes any sense. So I'm hoping that maybe he could just introduce this as its own separate measure and not a part of this budget bill. I am inclined to support it, but I don't know that it needs to be in this budget bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other senator on the San Nicolas amendment? On the San Nicolas amendment? Senator Esteves?
I'm still debating, Mr. Chairman. I think it's definitely a great initiative, and I would lend my support to it. I too am just wondering if this is too substantial for a budget bill. I think I know we've been, with regards to riders in budget bills, and while it's a common practice in Congress, it's been used sometimes throughout the history of the Guam Legislature, but generally I'm usually not in favor of substantial changes in operations or substantial changes outside of fiscal appropriations within a budget act. And I think we've seen such action before that had drastic changes to the way we do things that still have ramifications of today. I believe there was one budget act long ago where there was a rider that completely stripped the responsibilities of civil service and beefed up DOA like that. And up to now, there's still no consistency between the agencies, and they're still having issues functioning because that was done in a budget bill as opposed to having the time to deliberate on the floor. And again, I appreciate the time. I did read the committee report. Again, I think it's a great piece of legislation. I just wonder if we're going to take the time necessary to do it. I don't necessarily object. I think I'm just more raising a point of concern about the significance of placing this into a budget bill as opposed to a standalone measure.
Thank you. And I probably should make it clear that under the rules as it relates to the budget bill, if a piece of legislation has been heard and the committee report has been submitted to CORE, it can be introduced as an amendment in miscellaneous provisions. And fortunately or unfortunately, we didn't say that it had to be less than 2 pages or nothing over 5. It just said if it'd been heard. And so though I may be ruling that it's okay under the current rules, if someone wants to challenge the chair, that's their prerogative. I might have said something earlier had I not looked at the committee report and saw that it was 6 in favor of actually passing. It was not just to report out. It was 6 to pass. And I just figured I'd be swimming upstream, if I said it. It's Madam Chair of CORE.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just was rising for a point of information to reiterate or to mention that point that this bill did have its committee report go through CORE yesterday. It did receive 6 votes, all to pass, and the bill is also live on our website. If anybody wants to view it, it's Bill 286 to Dosmasi.
Any other senator wish to be heard? If not, Senator Siniclich, you're welcome to close unless, is there any objection? There's no objection. Okay. Senator Uggan, then Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I requested from you to bookmark Section 12 of page 125 with regards to board and commission stipends. There's an amendment that was circulated a little earlier. And I was taking a look at the next chapter, which is Chapter 13, Administrative Provisions, Spending Controls. And it has provisions such as hiring prohibited, government-funded travel prohibited, salary increments freeze, wireless communications restrictions, and several other limitations in regards to the expenditures of general fund and government funds over the course of fiscal year 19 to contain costs. So I believe that this is consistent with what is contained in the budget bill and consistent with what our people are expecting in terms of looking at ways in which we can reduce expenditures of this government. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask our colleagues for your consideration. What this provision will provide is a suspension of board and commission stipends. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All right, there's a Uggan amendment on the floor. Any senator wish to be heard? Any senator wish to be heard on the Uggan amendment as it's presented?
Thank you.
It strikes the current language in the section in the bill, and in its place replaces it with notwithstanding any other provision of law, rule, or regulation except for the Civil Service Commission and the Guam Education Board. A moratorium is placed on stipends for all boards and commission members for attendance at hearings or meetings that are funded by the Guam General Fund as provided in this Act from October the 1st, 2018 to September 30th, 2019. Provided, however, the GDOE Board and the CSC Commissioners may elect not to receive said compensation or stipends. Senator Lai.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I appreciate the intent of this amendment. I just find it to be unfair because it's my experience that many of these boards and commission members, they take their duties very seriously, and that if we're going to take away their stipends, I think we should take away all of the board stipends. This amendment does not affect stipends being made at autonomous agencies because it only affects, in fact, not even all the boards and commissions that are in line. It affects those that are being funded from the general fund only. And as you know, you've moved money around in this budget so that it's coming from all kinds of places, but but for the same purposes. And I would entertain that we allow an exception perhaps for civil service, because, not just because they're civil service, but because they are undertaking adjudication proceedings, right? Or these hearings that we're supposed to be having to decide claims. Workers' comp supposed to be having those too, but those have been put on hold for a while. But things like that, where they're either we put a policy behind our exemption, or we apply this across the board, and I would even say if it's possible, to apply this to autonomous agencies, Mr. Speaker. It's just not fair that board and commission members equally working for the government are going to be treated differently. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any other senator? Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I almost don't know how to speak to this. Basically, when board members are asked to serve on a board, these are members of the public who are coming in to help guide perhaps some agencies or some divisions within certain agencies, to set the policies, to look at matters within that agency or the divisions of the agency. And now we're saying that for their time and effort, and as little as it is, they will get compensated nothing. In other words, it's an act of love. And I guess regardless of who the next governor may be, if because there is not even some kind of incentive, or at least some kind of remuneration for the time that a member of the public will spend helping the government carry out and fulfill its mission, then I don't see why anybody would want to serve on a board. And we have the creation of many boards within the statutes of our island. And if nobody serves, or if there is a reluctance by members of the public at large to serve because they can't even pay for gas money or even the dinner that they're going to miss because they're going to go to a meeting, I'm not sure it really fulfills the mission that was created in statute for the purpose of the board. Without people, you don't have a board. I mean, right now, even with the stipend, we're finding many boards who can't meet quorum, or members just resign, and then we can't even fill that spot for that board to have quorum and to decide matters that are essential for the agency or the department or the division within the department to even move forward. I know that my wife had served on the board in the past, and not that she expected it, but I know that she took time out of her busy schedule when she could have been scheduling some good income by the work that she does, but she did it. And again, even I think it was a $25 remuneration was never ever paid, I think, in the 4 years that she served. And I think it was just a matter of appreciation, to the point where she says, okay, I've done my job, I've done my service, I can't do this anymore because I'm sacrificing a good income for the purpose of this, and then I don't even get remunerated for anything. I'm not sure this is wise policy. I mean, I understand the frugality of it in terms of, okay, we can save ourselves $25, $50 here and there, but this is not a frivolous spending. This is for boards that we created, that the legislature, whether it's this one or previous legislatures, have created to help the agencies, to help the government. I think it might hamper the efforts of the next governor, whoever he or she may be, right, in terms of being able to fulfill the spots on the board and not being able to move forward with the programs and policies and initiatives that the new governor would like to implement. I think I would have to, at this point, object to this amendment.
Thank you, Senator. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would also have to rise in opposition to this amendment. I think I share a lot of the same sentiments of the retiring speaker, but in addition to that, it might seem like a very small amount of money, these stipends, but I think it also represents an opportunity for access for all members of our community. $25 for an hour or 2 hours of their time might not, it might pale in comparison to what some of our professionals in the community make, but you know, the average person making minimum wage, we want additional people in our community from all walks of life to be represented in a lot of our boards and commission. I think diversity in our boards and commissions are important, and I think this stipend helps to ensure that we have that diversity. That being said, I share a lot of the sentiments of the retiring speaker in terms of just the potential savings. A lot of the professionals in our community who give up some of their time to participate on these boards and commissions often bring to light a lot of opportunities for us to streamline, opportunities for our agencies to be more effective and end up saving us a lot of money in the long run based on their experience and their knowledge and their subject matter expertise that they bring to these boards. And I think these small stipends really help us to be able to bring all different kinds of members with different backgrounds and different experiences into the boards and commissions that they serve. I also want to just go on record as saying that many of our boards and commissions have issues with maintaining quorum. And so if we don't have any incentive for them to attend, we might have more of an issue with them not even being able to meet in the first place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard? If not, Senator Ogden, you're welcome to close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, when I was thinking about introducing this particular measure, there was one thought that crossed my mind is, are we going to look at reducing expenditures, regardless as to what the amount is, before we venture into asking our people to pay more? That's really the underlying message behind this amendment, Mr. Speaker. And I hear these comments about not being able to fill quorum. You know, our people on boards and commissions serve because of public service, because they're able to contribute. And if they're not able to contribute and to commit the time and the effort, then in that particular case, they step aside in respect to the process and the need to be able to ensure that they're able to be committed to that entity. So when we're talking about creating incentives for $50 a meeting, Mr. Speaker, that's not incentive enough if, in fact, some of these board members are actually serving for compensation. They're serving to bring their expertise, to serve this island, to serve this community, so that, in fact, our government can operate with the inclusion or the consideration of some of their insights and their expertise. But you know, Mr. Speaker, I don't know how many of us in this room have served in nonprofit organizations. Because a lot of members, whether they're officers or whether they're board of directors in nonprofit organizations, do it for the love of the cause. They serve in that capacity because they believe in the cause and they want to contribute. Not because of any compensatory arrangement, not for compensation. Their compensation is knowing that they are influencing or affecting change for the better with regards to that particular cause. And that's how I look at it from the public service or government of Guam entities, Mr. Speaker. It's a reminder, this amendment, that it is not my money and it is not your money, but it's the people's money that we are expending. And whether it's $25,000 or $1 million, if we can realize some reduction in expenditures of this government, then we need to look at realizing those reductions in expenditures so that they can be allocated either to priority areas or improving the quality of life of our people. That's what this amendment is about in terms of ensuring that we get back to the basics of being reminded that this is the people's money before we venture off and ask our people to pay more. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. There's been an objection to the Uggan amendment. All those in favor of the Uggan amendment, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion fails. Mr. Augustine, do I understand you have some amendments in this section before we close miscellaneous provisions?
Are we at chapter 13? Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay, no.
Any other amendments in this chapter? I can close the chapter. Vice Speaker, did you have an amendment that you were?
Mr. Speaker, pass out amendment. It's a section with a blank 50104 of Title 11. I think this is the chapter it should go in. It's just to add the words as a ministerial duty to the Director of Administration's duty to deposit tax refund, to set aside the money for the tax refunds. Do you see it?
Has everybody seen the amendment? Has everybody seen? Some of you are still looking. Has everybody seen the amendment?
How come?
Okay. Any senator wish to be heard on the amendment? Any senator wish to be heard on the amendment? Any objection to the amendment? Any objection to the amendment? Any other amendments in this chapter before we close it? Madam Vice Speaker, do you have another amendment in this chapter, or is it going in 13?
I'm not sure the chapter, Mr. Speaker, right offhand. I think this chapter, so I have it in front of me, I'll pass it out. And when it says that the appropriation to the Historic Resources Division from that GVB Cultural and Sports Ambassadors Funds from 2018, that shall continue until it's fully expended. That's a special fund, so the money's already been set aside. I just want to make sure that they have the authority to finish the projects they're in the middle of. This is the second one? Okay. Oh, should I pass it out, Mr.
Yes,
is this for
please.
this chapter? Okay, thank you. Maybe one.
We'll take a short recess. Any other senator, please get your amendments copied. Senator Esteves, did I see your hand go up?
Mr. Chairman, as Vice Chair on Health, on behalf of the chairman, I have 2 amendments to propose. I'm just getting clarification on the second one.
Okay, have those been distributed, or they're being? Okay, while yours was, Vice Speaker, do you have any objection to my moving with another senator while yours is being copied? All right. Senator Esteves is introducing amendments that are that are titled at the top as being amendments from Dennis Rodriguez, DGR, and I will have him state which ones he wants to discuss first. Please, Senator Estevez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first amendment present before the body is an amendment to add a new section to Chapter 1 of the bill to read, or sorry, shouldn't be Chapter 1, but I believe in miscellaneous appropriations.
Correct.
Correct.
Go ahead.
All right, and it's to add a section, and it provides for the remainder of the general fund or general fund tax amnesty program proceeds received in fiscal year 2018 to be used by Department of Public Health and Social Services as a local matching requirement for the Medicaid program fiscal year 2018 shortfall, and that amount is $4 million as identified by Public Health.
All right, the first Estevez amendment on behalf of Senator Rodriguez is the tax amnesty, $4 million for matching for Medicaid. Has everybody seen that amendment? Any senator wish to be heard on the amendment? Yes, it's a DGR is on the top. Senator Estevez, as the Vice Chair of Health, is introducing it on behalf of the chairman. So,
just a point of inquiry, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman. I know that we've done a lot of amnesty appropriations. One of my concerns is if amnesty money doesn't come in on projection, and we did not prioritize the order of amnesty priorities in terms of what this will get paid first, and then this will get paid second, and then this will get paid third, then what happens is we may run the risk of certain other things getting money and areas that we may want to be more prioritized not getting money. And I just wanted to kind of put that out there for the members to realize that right now we just kind of have appropriations of amnesty money, and there's no priority order in which they are to be paid. If the sum total does not come out to what everyone's anticipating, it's possible that some things will get funded and others won't, and that will be entirely administration discretionary as opposed to body discretionary. Just so everybody understands that, because this will be another $4 million to Medicaid for matching, and if the amnesty money comes in, this $4 million could have gotten funded, and then $4 million for CMS might not have gotten funded. So we don't, as of right now on this budget, we don't have a priority order of amnesty expenditures, and that's just something for everybody. I want to make sure everybody's aware of, Mr. Chairman.
all right, thank you.
Mr.
Senator-
Speaker, do we also have a total so far of how much tax amnesty money we've appropriated?
We can run it.
Okay.
Let's just get through this one. Any other senator wish to be heard on the Rodriguez amendment being proffered by Senator Estevez on his behalf? Any senator wish to be heard? Any objection? Any objection? Senator Estevez, your next amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second amendment I'm proffering on behalf of the committee is to add on line 21, page 130 of the bill, to read, the Mayor's Council of Guam is authorized to renew employment of personnel required to operate the adult daycare and in-home and case management services as a result of the non-responsiveness of third parties to the recent RFP for adult daycare operations. In addition, senior center operations personnel may be renewed to reflect the new grant year and job order pursuant to the agreement between the Divisions of Senior Citizens, Department of Health and Social Services, and the Mayor's Council of Guam. Mr. Chairman, as I understand, when the RFP was put out for the third party or to outsource these services, there were no responsive bidders. And so with the new fiscal year coming up, the intent of the committee is that we want to keep these services available to the Manumku who utilize it. And in order to do that, we were going to maintain the responsibility at the Mayor's Council of Guam. And so this is an authorization for them to renew the employment that had been previously authorized to the Mayor's Council to conduct these operations.
We can put it in 13. I'm sorry, your reference to page 130 is in the next chapter, so.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman.
Well, no, as long as we have it on, there's no more in 12, we can close 12. Does anybody else have a 12? You still have a 12. I'm sorry, Senator, can you withdraw it? And
at this time, Mr. Chairman, I'll withdraw the amendment.
we're still trying to close 12. Anybody else have something for 12? Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I passed out an amendment, but it's like administrative. It's to extend this small amount of money that they got from this special fund from the GVB that was given to the Historic Resources Division, is just to extend it, and it should be the unexpended balance of the fiscal year 2018 appropriation, because it was already appropriated from that special fund, set aside. It's being used, but it's not done. So I just want to extend that so that they can use it throughout 2019. So I want to change the word fiscal year 2019 appropriation 2018, and the last word should be added, expended, until fully expended.
Okay. Has everybody seen the amendment? Everybody, any senator wish to be heard on this amendment? On this amendment?
Mr. Chair. Oh, right here.
Oh.
Just to clarify, right now it's printed at 2019, but we're talking about 2018. So
yeah,
that
no,
correction.
she has made it. She corrected herself that it should read 18.
Okay.
And then at the very bottom, it should be fully expended.
Until fully expended. Thank you.
Any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard? Any objection? Any objection? Do you have anything else in 12?
I do have one more, Mr. Speaker, and it would be almost the exact same amendment, but we don't have it in writing, but for the Commission, and their appropriation was strictly from Tourist Attraction Fund, and so I would just like to extend that so that they're able to use it, Mr. Speaker. Or actually, Mr. Speaker, no, I withdraw that amendment. I withdraw that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Last chance on 12. Last chance on 12. 13.
Mr. Speaker.
Let's go to 13. The first section is on hiring.
On section 1?
Yes.
I'd just like to ask that, I have legal writing it up, but to add under line 17, where you have the Guam Department of Education authorized to hire teachers, to include the University of Guam and GCC. So they're not prohibited from hiring because it's seasonal. It's as the semesters come around, and they have to identify, that's when they hire them.
Okay. All right.
So that's the amendment.
Yeah.
She's writing it.
As they write it, can we take Senator Esteves' amendment for Senator Rodriguez on this section? Okay. So everybody's seen the Rodriguez amendment, and Senator Esteves started to explain it, and I think he explained it fairly well. Does anybody have any further comments on the Rodriguez amendment by Senator Estevez? It's the Mayor's Council. All right, let's take a short recess. Everybody, please make sure that every member have a copy. It's marked Senator DGR on the top. Add line 21, page 130. Can we get copies to everyone, please? Thank you. We'll take a very, very short recess. Senator Estevez, I'll allow you to re-explain it again, just in case that some don't understand what this one's for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Mayor's Council of Guam took on the responsibility during, I think, the first round of the fiscal crisis in having personnel operate the adult daycare and in-home and case management services. Now, moving forward, there was an RFP put out to have this outsourced, and there has been no response from any third parties even interested in entertaining the bid. And so with the new fiscal year, this authorizes them to continue the employment of the personnel that they were utilizing for the adult daycare and in-home and case management services for these individuals. And so this is just a renewal of the authorization until we can, such time as there is interest in the RFP and we can contract this out.
For the information of the members, last March, when Catholic Social Services decided to discontinue their services as it relates to the Manamco services, the governor asked the Mayor's Council to assume this responsibility, and it was only supposed to be temporary. The employees that the Mayor's Council picked up were the employees that were with Catholic Social Services, but only temporarily picked up by the Mayor's Council. They thought it was going to end at the end of next month. The RFP went out, and unfortunately, no one picked up a bid. And so the Mayor's Council is going to continue to handle the project using those same employees that were brought over by Catholic Social Services. And the chairman's only trying to make sure that this prohibition of hires doesn't affect these employees that are necessary to continue the services to the NAMCO.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Senator Argan.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly stand in support of the amendment. The only issue is that Catholic Social Services was concerned about not receiving any remittances or payments in a timely manner. And then this government, I believe it was a number of 87, decided to retain the Catholic Social Services personnel and maintain that obligation on a bi-weekly basis. So I just don't understand how sometimes decisions are made in this government where you have a nonprofit organization providing a critical service to this community, and now you're absorbing all of their personnel, which obligates this government on a biweekly basis, rather than taking that biweekly payment and having remitted to Catholic Social Services so that they will still be providing that critical service to our community. That's the concern that I have in terms of why is it that we disregarded a nonprofit organization that had been doing an excellent job for a number of years, Mr. Speaker, and now we're saying we're obligating this government and paying benefits above and beyond in terms of the government cost per employee versus having retained that contract with Catholic Social Services and just remitting what is presently being paid out at the moment. So, and all those employees would have still been employed by Catholic Social Services. So now there's a transference of obligation when in fact the obligation could have remained with Catholic Social Services as a nonprofit organization, and they were doing a very good job, and their employees would have been retained from that perspective. But, Mr. Speaker, it's a service that we know, any of us that had an opportunity to be able to visit that facility, we know is extremely critical in terms of being able to provide services to our Manamkus as well as some of our individuals who have severe needs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator. Any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard? Vice Speaker?
Just wondering why this is necessary, Mr. Speaker. If they have the contract with public health, is it because of the hiring freeze that this is necessary?
I think they're trying to make sure that since the committee put in this hiring freeze for the upcoming year, that to make it explicitly clear that they can continue to keep these individuals to assist in the care of the Manamco.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Nicholas.
Just a question, Mr. Chairman. The way the language reads is that the Mayor's Council is authorized to renew employment of personnel. These individuals were hired on a limited term basis.
Yes, they were.
Are we narrowing the renewal of employment also to a limited term basis? Because this is kind of not specific to that. It just says renew employment.
Not all limited term are being prohibited in the upcoming fiscal year because of the fact that there are so many critical positions that really are limited term, and so we didn't. But I think what the chairman of health is trying to do was just to make sure that there's no glitch in this, that somehow someone tries to interpret the prohibition as applying to them and completely throwing off that.
No, I understand. I want to make sure that the language we have here is not somehow indicating that we're looking to permanentize this as a function of the Mayor's Council. And so I'd like to proffer an amendment, Mr. Chairman, that after the word renew, we just add the words limited term. So the Mayor's Council is authorized to renew limited term employment of personnel.
I don't have an objection to the amendment, Mr. Chairman. I think I don't know if it's necessary, guys, because I understand it. All the employment of personnel under the Mayor's Council of Guam are in the unclassified sector, at-will employees. But I have no objection to the amendment and specifying. Again, no objection.
Okay. Anything else on the St. Nicholas amendment? Any objection? There being none. On the amendment as amended, anyone wish to be heard? Any objection to the amendment? Any objection to the amendment? Thank you, Senator Esteves. Senator Snockstein, I understand you have an amendment.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. It's an amendment to line 17, page 130. It's just to add after the Guam Department of Education, comma, the University of Guam and the Guam Community College are authorized to hire teachers And the only reason why I'm adding that is because the University of Guam GCC does have seasonal classes employment, and it would not require them to keep them hired for the whole year.
Thank you, and I did receive a letter from the 10th president
Yes, that's what I was referring to also. Thank you.
asking that. Okay? Any other senator wish to be heard? Any senator? Any objection? Oh,
Sorry,
Vice-
Mr. Speaker, could you just clarify that again? This is an exemption to the hiring freeze on page 130,
Yes.
and but
The-
how does it how does this language keep it seasonal?
It's not so much that it's seasonal as much as the university wanted to make it clear that, yes, they are funded by this budget act and by the general fund, and they're concerned about the prohibition against hiring their academic personnel. I mean, we could just make it very clear, academic personnel is all we're talking about. Because they didn't want to have any question about their independence. They have no problem with a prohibition against them picking up any other, cleaning people or whatever. But they just wanted to make sure that
Teachers.
they're not prohibited from hiring the academic personnel, the academicians that are on a contract or just seasonally employed.
Okay, maybe, Mr. Speaker, this would help. So your bill actually says that the Guam Department of Education is authorized to hire teachers. And this amendment doesn't show that language, is authorized to hire teachers? Or are we going to say University of Guam GC authorized to hire teachers? Teachers is okay language? That's fine with me then. That sounds awkward, but.
They're teachers now?
Maybe we should say DOE's authorized to hire teachers, UOG and GC are authorized to hire academic personnel, comma.
They're still
then
teachers, but okay. Yes.
Would there be any objection to
No-
having it
no
read
objection. Speaker.
academic personnel? Okay. The Guam Department of Education, the University of Guam, and Guam Community College are authorized to hire academic personnel. Any senator wish to be heard? Any objection? On section 1, any other amendments? Senator Estevez.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, the hiring prohibition is only for 1 quarter, correct? The start of the new fiscal year? September 1st, 2018 to December 31st, 2018?
Correct.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move that on, and while I apologize for not having the written amendment, is to just strike a portion. So on page 130, line 13, to strike the Customs and Quarantine Agency. And the intent, Mr. Chairman, is because they are funded by a special fund, and there's movement in this body to increase that funding level. And so we want to make sure that as soon as that money becomes available, that they can start planning for it and start planning for a recruitment cycle. And since they're not directly tied to the general fund, I believe that they shouldn't be restricted to this appropriation, and it should be on an as-needed basis based on what their requirements are and what the special fund provided to them allows.
Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I understand the amendment and excluding customs and quarantine certainly in the protection of our borders is critical. but just to clarify the costs associated with the operations of Customs and Quarantine Agency, right now, because there's insufficient revenues being generated with the customs user fees, the general fund is absorbing approximately $1.2 million in obligations, ongoing obligations. Then, in conjunction with that, there's an effort to recruit, if they haven't been recruited already, an additional 29 customs officers. So that would add an additional slightly over $1 million obligation to that agency. Is it an investment worth funding? Absolutely, because they protect our borders. But just so that everyone understands, right now, there's $1.2 million being expended annually for Customs and Quarantine out of the general fund that's being augmented. And then because of the active recruitment of additional 29 possibly customs recruits, that would cost an additional $1 million. So eventually, this budget would be reflective of $2.2 million in possible general fund support for our Customs and Quarantine Agency until they submit a proposal for an adjustment upward of their fees. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
If I may, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
If there's no one else. I think one thing we can consider, and that is true, that there is general fund appropriation used to offset based on the current levels, and that's just to balance them out. Customs by design should be entirely funded based on cost reimbursement on fees generated from the airport. While not in this specific amendment, I would submit the potential to look at, even within this budget, that there has been a measure proffered forward to address those user fees that has been publicly heard. And I believe there may be the potential to maybe add this into the budget, add those provisions into the budget. That way we can accordingly readjust the revenue or appropriation to Guam Customs and Quarantine to support that. As I understand it, and I've been told many times, there's kind of a chicken and an egg situation. If we don't appropriate them an upward number, then they can't negotiate. They can only negotiate the rate based on the appropriation authorized by the body.
Let me take a short recess. Okay? Colleagues, in order to keep moving, I'm going to bookmark this to allow for Senator Esteves to get his We'll go to section 2 on the government-wide travel prohibition. Anybody want to make any amendments to that section?
Right here, Mr. Chair.
We're on government-wide travel. Did you have an amendment, Senator Lee? You're recognized. Senator Espaldon, yes?
Is she, she recognized?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this amendment, I passed it out. Everybody should have a copy of it. This is under Section 2C, and this basically, Section 2 is a government-funded travel prohibition. And under Section 2C, at this point, it reads, travel to promote tourism on Guam, provided that such travel is paid for by the Tourist Attraction Fund and is restricted to the president or his designee. And the amendment would also add on language after designee and appropriate GVP staff and cultural performers as are identified by the Board of Directors as necessary to accomplish the goal of the travel. And the reason why I have to add this in, Mr. Chairman, I think you having been the former chairman of tourism, as well as myself and several of the others in here, a big part of the marketing effort of Guam Visitors Bureau when they go out to the various destinations is to attend the expos or the travel shows, whether it be in Japan, in Korea, or whatnot. And they've been very effective in terms of, if anything, like in Korea, to attract more visitors to Guam. I think if we just limit the travel just to the president by himself, then all of a sudden we would not have a presence at any of the travel shows aside from the president himself standing right there by himself. And I think that, again, I think the inclusion of our cultural dancers, we've had Jesse and Ruby basically provide the entertainment as well. I think, again, and we have won numerous awards for having the best presentation at these travel exhibits and expos. I think it's necessary that GVB bring their performers over to showcase the cultural identity of Guam so that we can entice our visitors, the visitors to come to Guam. I know that we're trying to really restrict GVB and some of the things that they do, but I think in this aspect, I think it's necessary, it's a necessary part of the marketing effort in trying to, if anything, bring back the Japanese tourist market and to increase the travel markets out of Korea and other destinations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Any senator wish to be heard on the Espaldon amendment? Any senator wish to be heard? Any objection? No objection?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Lee, did you have an amendment in this? Yes.
Sitsus Masi, Mr. Chair, my amendment is in terms of reporting requirements for travel, and it reads, all off-island government travel that is publicly funded during fiscal year 2019 shall be reported quarterly to the Speaker of the Legislature in Guahan. This section shall apply to all government entities and shall include the traveler, the source of funds, the purpose of travel, and the costs of travel. And Mr. Chair, I just offer this amendment because many entities in our government submit travel documentation, and not all of them are streamlined, not all of them offer the same amount of information. And so I just want to ensure that this body and the public understands how much money is being spent for travel, what the purpose is, and what the cost is, as well as the source of the funds.
Mr. Speaker, I think this is for the next chapter. This is one of the last provisions in the next chapter. No, the last chapter.
Okay, yeah, hold on to it and we'll go. We're still in section 2 on travel restriction.
Yeah, it's in the next
Any other senator wish to be heard on that section? Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I pass out an amendment. This is at the request of the Attorney General to include on subsection H, where it says travel required for witnesses testifying on behalf of the government to include and government attorneys representing the government or the people of Guam in a criminal or civil case. So it's just to include the attorneys as subsection 8 currently.
Okay, so what you want to do is witnesses and,
well, it has language testifying on behalf. So we just put, do you see our amendment, Mr. Speaker? So it's yeah, we wanted to keep that language that there were witnesses testifying on behalf and just add the words and in bold and government attorneys representing. You see that, the bold part?
okay. Does everybody have a copy of the amendment? Any senator wish to be heard? Any senator wish to be heard on the amendment to H? Any objection? Thank you. On section 2, any further amendments in section 2? May
I just inquire, Mr. Speaker? So I was comparing this to the 2018 budget, and in that budget, there was a provision, subsection C, travel by Imagalahan Guahan, Isagundo na Magalahan Guahan, the Attorney General, other officials to represent the people of Guam at meetings and functions determined critical to the welfare of Guam by Imagalahan Guahan. And then it requires a report by DOA monthly regarding the travel expenses. I'm just curious, does this, by removing this former subsection D, completely ban the governor from traveling?
From government travel, yeah.
From government
From local funds, with local funds. If there's federal funds,
any funds, it would be any of our general or special funds appropriated by this act.
yeah, in A in the beginning, we're prohibiting travel except for travel that is federally funded.
Mr. Speaker, may I ask?
Do you want to take a
Well, I just wondering if we know the impact of this. I just, you know, I am all for restricting travel, but I also, you know, think the governor's the only one who really can represent us when it comes to speaking with, you know, Department of Interior and things like that.
You can reset. You can. We're open to you making that amendment.
Mr. Speaker, may I just ask now, this travel ban, this travel prohibition applies to all travel that is not federally funded. Does that also include, because GVB is mentioned here in one section C, does this also apply to travel for any funds that are autonomous agency funds as well? And
yes, in C it says travel that is paid for by Tourist Attraction Fund, except for.
I guess I'm trying to understand the broad stroke of this prohibition, Mr. Chair, if you can. Would this include then a travel ban essentially on all travel that is not federally funded? So
All travel that is not, that is using funds appropriated in this act.
So if a body were to belong to an organization, they would not be able to utilize government funds to attend, say agencies that are part of boards or organizations associated with their agencies. For
Correct.
example, the airport attending FAA events, the port attending.
It's not. That's not appropriated in this act. But if it's an agency, if it's a government agency that has, except for mental health, medical enforcement of court duties, enforcement of residential, and witnesses. But if you wish, I can put a bookmark here, and you and Senator and the Vice Speaker can add if this is something you guys want to address in this section.
I think, Mr. Chairman, it may be appropriate because there are some memberships in organizations that directly affect regulation in the industries that require, to include, for example, the judiciary, where there are certain, they partake in certain things, and others.
Okay, I'll put a bookmark.
Thank you.
And both of you are trying to do similar kinds of amendments. Senator Ada.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just, if you can clarify there on paragraph D, line 4, it restricts the travel by law enforcement personnel for investigation and whatnot, but in reading this, it seems, does that preclude then the governor's security, governor and lieutenant governor's security from traveling?
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Mr. Chairman, can you say that again?
Executive security is not included as an exception in this.
Oh, okay, understood.
We'll bookmark this section. 2 senators are going to be providing us with amendments they're thinking about. Section 3, salary increment freeze. And please note in the last line, upon the lifting of such salary increments and military and merit bonus freeze, the payment of increments or merit bonuses shall not be retroactively applied and shall only be prospectively applied. This is to prevent what happened 7 years ago when we went back to 1991. Okay, so it's try to be as tight as possible and not to leave it open so that it can be possibly retroactively paid later. It's making it very clear. For this 12-month period, none. After the fiscal year, if the economy shoots up under a new governor, then go at it. Okay? Tom, Senator Vice Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, I'm just concerned because, like what you described, what happened before, and so this language freezes, the first part of this freezes the earning, it looks to be. There shall be a freeze on increments, promotions, reclassifications, merit bonuses. There's a freeze on the earning of those. Or that's how it looks to me. And then the last sentence talks about the payment. And I think that's why we got into that, ruckus before, where I don't know, I just think it should be clear if you intend, it's like it's the intention that they're not allowed to earn for this period, and they're only going to earn going forward.
Correct.
Okay.
During the 12-month period between that fiscal year,
right,
there'll be no accrual of that obligation, and so it just doesn't happen during that fiscal year. After the fiscal year in the next budget, when you guys write it, you may reinstate it, but you cannot, you will not be liable for the 12-month period. Right. Senator Agan.
Just inquiry, Mr. Speaker, so that our people understand, based on this section, what is the financial impact on annualized basis?
The savings, what was what's the savings on this one? For the line agencies, it's 1.3 million. GDOE has its own
1.3 million.
It's more than the. Okay, let's continue. On salary freeze in this section, anybody? Anybody want to add anything in section 3? Any objection to section 3 as it's currently written? Section 4, Senator Castro, you're recognized. Section 4, I mean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I submitted for the body's consideration the striking of the entire Section 4. I think, although not necessary, hard copies have been circulated. I've been made aware by the administration that one or more of the deputy positions are actually partially funded federally, so this might have an adverse impact. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The motion by Senator Castro is to strike Section 4.
So once again, Mr. Speaker, if I can inquire, what is your funding reduction for Section 4, the impact?
It's about $1 million.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
About $1 million. 1.2 million. And just for the information of the members, this amount was already taken out of the agency budgets that we passed, and if it is reinstated, we will have to go back in and. All right, Senator Ogden, thank you for objecting. He did.
Mr. Speaker, on that note, I object to the amendment.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick question. So this, if it should pass, would effectively mean that October 1st, in less than 60 days, all the deputy directors of the Government of Guam Executive Branch will be unemployed.
They are unclassified. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Morrison.
Mr. Chair, may I ask, was there a methodology used to determine this cut or freeze? Or removing the funding?
Yes, we went in and in every agency just took out the amounts and the benefits for those positions.
That was the methodology. There was not any consideration for their core mandate. For example, Department of Public Works, Public Health. I think these agencies call for more of an extensive mandate. I'm not sure if those were factored in.
We just went through and cut them all rather than trying to make a distinction between them. It would be a slippery slope. Which one is large enough, which one isn't, which one has a bigger core mission, it just cut. We were trying to show a cut. And we spent the first week with everybody dancing on my head that I wasn't making enough cuts. I'm now making the cuts, and I'm showing what the cuts are.
I raise that concern, Mr. Chair, because I do think agencies such as the Department of Public Health, as we all know, I mean, public health as one of our priorities, I think should be looked at the core mandates and the extensive programs they have there to provide services for our community. And I'm not sure how just eliminating those positions was, or just taking the funding out. It was just the only methodology used. But I just raised those concerns, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Any other senator? Senator Esteves.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, while I understand the justification, and I think we've balanced the budget with the expectation that these positions would not be funded within the agencies, I think we still need to have respect for the executive branch with regards to the separation of power. We've cut the governor's office and we've cut the executive branch substantially, and I think that's fine. But to take away the authority for the chief executive to be able to hire or fire deputies, number ones and number twos within his own budget that we've appropriated to the governor, I think is a grave overstep of our position. So I'd like to proffer an amendment to the amendment, which would be on line 130 or page 132, line 3, to strike the word government and replace it with agency. And so this would preclude the agencies from using their funds to fund unclassified deputy positions, but it would not preclude the governor from potentially using their own budget to maybe pick up a deputy in a critical agency that they feel they need a number two. And I think that flexibility with respect to their budget that we've appropriated them, I think would be a fair compromise. So the agency isn't funding the deputy position, it'd be the governor's office.
Just point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Let's complete the motion on whether or not it's deleted. If the motion fails and the section is still there, you can come back with your amendment.
You're right, Mr. Chairman.
We're still on the Castro amendment to strike the entire section. There's been an objection. Okay, you wish to close?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the record, I certainly don't have any reservations with cutting the executive branch like we did every other branch. My only plea would be to extend the same courtesies for the chief executive to decide, which members of his cabinet or senior staff that he should choose to prioritize over the other. I think to isolate a particular classification of employees or class of employees and send them a pink slip 30 to 60 days out, I think it's just not responsible planning on our part, and I think it's a cheap shot, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to introduce the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. On the motion to strike the entire section 4, there's been an objection. All those... No, the Esteves amendment will be taken care of after we do, if it's going to be struck, because you're not going to have 4 words in the middle of a struck section. All right, so there's been an objection. All those in favor of the Castro amendment, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion fails. Senator Esteves, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we amend Section 4, page 32, line 3, second word, to strike the word government and replace with the word agency. Again, with the justification, we're not going to be funding director or deputy director positions from the agencies, but I think allowing the government the flexibility from within his or her own budget to determine where they might need additional leadership or support depending on what their intent is or leadership philosophy on how they want to run the executive branch. So I believe if it's within their own budget, I'd rather see maybe a deputy director of Department of Revenue and Taxation than maybe a random special assistant, for example. So I think that flexibility is very important, and I think it lends respect to the separation of powers. If we've appropriated the governor the money to run his office and run the government, then we should allow him or her to do so with less restrictions from this body. Thank you.
Thank you. The Esteves amendment is to just replace the word government on line 3 to read agency. Any senator wish to be heard? Senator Uggan.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly appreciate the justification for the mover of the amendment to propose his amendment, but you know, in this particular case, it really comes down again to expending government resources and public funds. And when we're looking at this, and this idea about the governor having the flexibility to appoint or to hire a deputy director and some of these other positions, Mr. Speaker, the heart and soul of this government are the classified employees. They are the individual workers, whether they're in a key position as a supervisor or an administrator within that agency or a line personnel. They are the heart and soul of this government. So to even think that hiring a deputy director when you already have a director that is tasked with overseeing that particular agency and using the justification that in fact there's a need for additional personnel, there really isn't. Because that director has a full responsibility to be able to administer that agency, and then that director has access to all those classified employees who have been running this government for the last 40, 50 years. So, Mr. Speaker, I object to the amendment.
Thank you. There's been an objection. Any other senator wish to be heard? Any senator wish to be heard? None. On the, do you wish to close?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I ask my colleagues to lend their support. I believe it's a compromise moving forward. We don't know who the next governor is going to be. I think that's still in the air. And so to allow them the flexibility moving forward to have the ability to lead this government, and already in a difficult spot with the decreased budget, I think it's important to allow flexibility. Too much constraints, many constraints could have a negative impact. And so what we're talking about right now is employing these positions as the governor, future governor sees fit, or current governor sees fit, but only within their own budget. That's all I'm asking here, Mr. Chairman. I think if it's within their budget and they feel that it's necessary to run the executive branch, we have to allow that process to happen. So I ask for my colleagues' consideration and support in not overstepping our ability and respecting the separation of powers.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. I know the mover of the amendment closed, but I do have a point of inquiry. Maybe if you can clarify as chair. If we were to adopt the amendment and change it to agency, some of these agencies are funded from special funds. So, for example, the Guam Visitors Bureau is funded from the Tourist Attraction Fund. Technically, if we change it to agency, the Guam's Visitors Bureau may not necessarily be the cost center for the deputy with that amendment, but can they still be paid for from the Tourist Attraction Fund? Because now we're not restricting government funds, we're just restricting agency. And so technically any special fund can be tapped to pay for any deputy position. just as long as it's not coming out of the agency line item, but the fund itself, the source of the money, can still be tapped. Is that accurate?
As it relates to GVB, that is still government funds. I know GVB keeps trying to believe the TAF belongs to them. That is a tax by the government. And as to the other agencies, they can be creative if they want to, and when I proposed this amendment, I kept thinking the British government can change government in one day with the civil servants at the top and just the minister of moving out that day. Maybe I watched too much C-SPAN. Did that answer your question? There's been an objection to the Esteves amendment. All those in favor of the Esteves amendment, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion fails. Section 5, wireless communication restrictions. Senator Ada? Oh. No? Okay. Any senator wish to be heard on this prohibition? Senator Torres.
Mr. Chair, I recall several sessions ago we had this type of issue before, and we had put a provision that then forced everybody to go to an iConnect kind of system to bypass this. Are we going to end up in the same place, Mr. Chair? Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Yes. In the last legislature, which we were both members of, there was an amendment that was proffered by the other Senator Ada, and that was adopted by the body. Yes.
I just don't want us to be in a situation where we're just shifting from one area to another, and we're not going to arrive at any true savings.
Okay, the current Senator Ada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I really I object to this restriction. You know, the wireless communications is a tool, an efficiency tool. And to take that away, you know, is just, here we are wanting to operate as efficiently as possible and to save what? Maybe several $1,000s? So, you know, I don't, it's like cutting off your nose to, was it? Spite your face? So I object to this restriction.
Thank you. There's been an objection by the current Senator Ada, Senator Uggan, then Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, I understand where you're coming from in terms of incorporating this provision in here and restricting the use of wireless communications. But I'm looking also at the entire provision, Mr. Speaker, just for the information of the public. This section shall not apply to Magalain Guahan, Isigundan and Magalain Guahan, the Speaker, the Chief Justice, the Presiding Judge, official use of the Crisis Hotline Program of the Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center, law enforcement officials, on-call attorneys of the Office of the Attorney General, and the Office of the Public Defender Service Corporation, on-call health professionals at the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, the Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center, Department of Public Health and Social Services, village mayors and vice mayors, Guam Fire Department and EMS officials, on-call emergency management personnel, the Chief Medical Examiner, and the Guam Election Commission. So I'm looking at this, Mr. Speaker, and I'm looking at the exception clause, and I believe that some of the concerns could be allayed in terms of the exceptions being applied to critical areas and not necessarily across the board to the government of Guam. So I certainly support this particular provision, and hopefully it translates into some cost reductions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Lee?
Point of inquiry, Mr. Speaker. If OFB can just give us a little bit more information about this section and how much the potential savings would be?
We unfortunately don't have the billings from the various agencies. That doesn't come in any report currently.
Is there an estimate?
No, we don't have one.
Okay, thank you.
There's been an objection to the section. Is there a motion to strike the section? There's a motion to strike being offered by Senator Torres. Vice Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, was there an audit recently regarding this? I can't remember the findings, but what were their findings? Is there abuse, or are they complying with the law?
That we know of, over the last year and a half, there has been no audit in the last year and a half that has stated anything like that. It was just an effort to include something. If there's a motion to strike and it survives, that's great. I mean, that's up to the body. I'm not going to light my hair on fire on this one.
So I'll move to strike.
Yes, Senator Torres already did.
Okay.
Okay. There's a move to strike this section. Senator Uggan. Okay. You don't object to the strike, do you? Or are you supporting this current remaining? So, okay. So all those in favor of the motion to strike, please indicate by raising your hand. 2, 3, 4, 7, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. 7. Seven. Motion fails. Section 6, certification paid differential suspended.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just on that last section, and it's more of a technical, on page 133, line 9, I believe it should be for the first violation as opposed to the fire violation, just to make it clear.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Section 6, certification paid differential suspended. Anyone wish to be heard? Vice Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, I know this affects certified accountants and certified auditors, things like this at the public auditor's office. Where else will this have an effect? Does this affect the legislature or anywhere else?
I don't believe we have. Oh, yes, a couple of ours have. Legislature's not eligible. But wherever there are members of the accounting, GDOE, UOG, the Attorney General's Office, DOA, when this certification was initially introduced, I'll be real honest, I was not in favor of it. And when it was initially implemented, some of them were actually layering it until I jumped out in front of it and grabbed a few of them and said, you choose one certification. And then now I've discovered it's become a permanent increase. That the 15,000, if it's funded, they get 15,000 every single year as a bonus for the certification. It's not just a one-time bonus to say, good job that you went out and got that you studied and you passed and got CFE, CPA, whatever. It could remain as a continuing increase to your salary without a Hay study. It's 15,000 for CPA, 10,000 for 15%, and then 10 for CFE, CFEG, whatever those alphabet soups that you have after their names. But yeah, I didn't think there was going to be a permanent increase in their salary. And so that's why in this one, though it may not be a huge savings, it's got to stop. We've got to do something about violating the Hay study and the CWA with all of these. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So could you clarify then what the savings is proposed to be? And does that mean that those who have received it gets taken away for the next fiscal year, or those who received it are grandfathered in and everyone new doesn't get this?
No, for this fiscal year, they will not receive that amount. And in the next fiscal year, if it's the desire of the body and they don't change the law that it becomes a permanent, then we put a provision at the end of this section that if and when the certification differential suspension is lifted, that they shall not retroactively be repaid for the year, for just this upcoming fiscal year. Okay.
All right, so by line 14, when it says, and shall take effect, you mean the suspension?
Yes.
Right, so shall be suspended effective October 1. Okay. But it is only for the one fiscal year, and it comes back?
Well, no, it is for one fiscal year just for this budget. At some point in the next legislature, or even in this legislature, there may be need to amend the law to not make it a permanent increase. It should have been a bonus for that 1 year, not a continuing increase without a CWA study, not without a Hay study. It just, your salary was increased by 10 or 15% because of the and they're the only ones.
All right, but you're not proposing to remove it permanently. I guess I'm just confused.
Yeah,
okay,
no,
so
we're going to need to have a public hearing on that. This one is just a savings measure, and so in the budget, I think I can do that to amend it without to repeal it would require a public hearing, and I'm just asking for a suspension for the year.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Do we know the savings or it's not?
It's about 100,000.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Is there a motion? Any objection to leaving to section 6? Hearing none. Section 7, executive branch limitation on expenditure, that as far as the appropriations in chapters 2 through 10, that they expend only 25%. Yeah. Yeah. Senator Uggan, Senator Nicholas, Vice Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I understand the intent of this particular provision, and conceptually, I certainly support it. But there are some expenditures that are traditionally paid in the first quarter of the fiscal year. And I think you alluded to some of them a little earlier during the discussion, like the COLA. That would be, there's a requirement by law that it would be paid by November 1st. There are other...
Yeah, that's in Chapter 11.
So it's separate and apart?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's not included in those expenditures.
Okay, because you highlighted chapters 2, 3, 5,
yes,
7, and the additional chapters. So I wasn't too sure if it was applicable to some of those one-time obligations, like even the bond payments, the debt payments.
Debt service is in Chapter 1.
Okay.
COLA is in Chapter 11, and TEDSN is in Chapter 11.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Nicholas and then Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just an observational concern. I think we do need to make an amendment here, and that is because the way we structured the budget of the Office of Imagalahin Guahan is that already 25% of his total appropriations is from the general fund. The way I read this is that only 25% of such appropriation shall be expended, and I'm concerned that that means only 25% of that 25% can be expended. And so that's, I think, overly restrictive. We may either need to strike Section 5 entirely, but the thing is that Section 5 also spills into other agencies that did not have the same SAR component. Based on the budget we have, is actually Chapter 5A, excuse me, Chapter 5G, which is DOA, and Chapter 5H. So I would need to make an amendment, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me.
On page 45 of the Magalahi's appropriation, we already have a 25% in there.
My concern, Mr. Chairman, is that the budget is already 25% general fund, 75% SAR, and that this limits the expenditure of those appropriations to another 25% of that.
I'm sorry, I realize you're speaking, but I've been told 4 hours of, we have to take a short recess so that they can do whatever they do to YouTube.